Bon appetit, and welcome to a gastrophonic episode of Genre Grinder. This month, we're talking about food-themed movies, and my guest is the person I share the most of my meals with, my significant other, Kristine Fisher. Say hello, Kristine.
Hello, Kristine.
And why are you here, Kristine?
I chose to focus on feast-themed movies, mainly because I have a latent culinary degree, and when I say latent, there's a time frame that it can be used. Typically within a year of getting it, you need to use it, or basically you lose all the knowledge. I mean, you know that from having a graphic design degree, like there's a certain amount of time where that knowledge becomes irrelevant, you can't use it no more. Same thing. Anyway, I still have happy memories of it. A lot of the knowledge still remains in my brain from my schooling days back then. Also, we're part of a Facebook group called Social Deliciousing. Do we want to out Tyler for being the lead of that group?
Tyler is probably the only one listening to this that would even, it wouldn't even matter. I don't know how many, it's just some of our friends.
Yeah, and they post horribly wonderful pictures of their finished completed dishes, and they're just so great, and it's all the food that you make during quarantine, and it's just, people are just such artists sometimes when it comes to food, so that's why I'm like, social distancing, we should watch some like feast-based movies.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, technically, Minnesota is open, and we actually just went to a restaurant today.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still getting a lot of meals delivered and takeouts.
Yeah, using up a lot of DoorDash, and I still try to cook at the same level I did back during quarantine, but it's just, why do it if you can like get delivery or go to a restaurant?
There was a brief period where I was cooking with you in the other room because you were working from home.
That's
and
right.
I could run into the other room and ask you directions.
Yes.
And as soon as you weren't in the other room anymore, I didn't enjoy cooking anymore.
Aww.
I actually kind of hate cooking. You know that, listeners
Of
don't.
course.
I'm not a fan. I don't enjoy it. I like eating, and I like lots of kinds of food.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people I can appreciate very special food,
Mm-hmm.
and I also am not picky. So
This is true.
yeah, I'll eat whatever, and yeah, there's not. I don't like mushrooms, but I actually can even eat mushrooms. It's olives are really the thing I hate.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's no hiding olives.
I can't think of any case where I like olives. So the idea here is food themed movies, and that's not really a genre.
Mm-hmm.
It's a type of movie usually within a genre, like, so it would be like something else would be related to. And I think most people, the first thing that would pop into their head would be one of the many food documentaries.
Yes. I have many favorite food documentaries.
Right, and those really picked up, I would say, in the mid to late 2000s
Mm-hmm.
with Netflix and Hulu and Amazon streaming, I think because they're not expensive to make and they almost guarantee streaming views.
Yep, and chefs needed something to do.
Yeah.
And then there was a big uptick in documentaries during the 70s from Les Blanc.
Yeah, Les
And-
Blanc, who is most famous for directing the Burden of Dreams about the making of Fitzcarraldo.
Yeah.
But yes, he did a lot of shorter, 30 minutes to an hour long documentaries.
Mhm.
A lot of them are on Criterion, actually.
Yes.
Um,
My favorite was Garlic as Good as 10 Mothers.
yeah, so he would go to like festivals.
Yes.
And he would, I assume he was an outsider. I never researched this, but I
Mhm.
assume he was more of an outsider, so he was interested in the way the food was made.
Yes. And the kind of obsession that people had for things.
Whereas I think that I kind of stopped watching all the documentaries the newer ones, because they kind of fall into a formula. And in most cases, they're really about either the chef as a celebrity
Yes.
or the business of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And even the really good ones like Genes of Sushi
Yes.
is a pretty good, for me, way of describing how to make sushi and what
Mhm.
goes into sushi.
Mhm.
But it's such a great movie, in part because it's relaxing and also because it's an interesting kind of tragic story
Yes.
about the way this older guy is not really letting his son move out, and the kind of way that sushi is super expensive. And
Correct.
yeah.
Some people refer to it as being food porn, which I totally agree with.
Yeah.
They're like laminating like fresh pieces of fish with like their house branded like soy sauce or like mirin on top, and that's just beautiful settings, like like beatific sort of music swelling, like classical, like, yeah, here it is.
Mm-hmm. And there's, of course, there's the Food Network and all the shows that I believe was it like A&E or Bravo that before there was a separate Food Network had cooking shows, and there's of course the classic PBS ones.
Yes.
I would say from our childhood, the first celebrity chef I remember just sort of standing out was Wolfgang Puck.
Mine was Galpin Gourmet, Jan Kan Cook, and Julia Child.
Yeah, Julia Child's like the original, but she already when I was born in 1980, she was already an older idea. Yeah. I remember Wolfgang Puck being like the new hotness when I was like
of it all.
Yeah, and then that became like celebrity chefs are now a big thing.
Oh yeah.
To the point where there's a movie in theaters right now about Anthony Bourdain.
Yes.
Who had 20 different TV shows over his career.
Well, I would
and
say
produced Joe Beam of Sushi.
That's right, he did. I would say in total he had 3-ish.
Was it 3?
Shows.
Okay.
And then it's up for debate about if No Reservations was a cooking show versus him just traveling to go to different restaurants.
Yeah, it was like a restaurant show. But anyway, we're not really talking about those.
No.
So we're just kind of getting that out of the way.
Out of your mind.
That's like a separate thing that I don't think I'll ever plan on covering, but much respect to the idea of food documentaries and how they became super mega popular within the last decade or so.
The other things that you want to put on your mind as a listener is that we're not going to be talking about scenes of movies involving food.
Right. So, like, there's a lot of movies that have famous food scenes. The one I always think of is the making spaghetti in prison scene in Goodfellas.
With the razor blade.
Razor blade cuts it so thin that it melts in the pan. Yeah. That's like one of the best. I mean, almost all of Scorsese's, well, not all, but a lot of Scorsese's earlier things are about food. Food comes up a lot.
And his mom did the catering for his films?
Yeah, and
awesome.
Coppola's the same way. And the Godfather movies will have a lot of food scenes.
Yeah. And oranges is being symbolic.
Yeah. Food is symbolic of death. And when I was telling my mother we were doing this, she couldn't remember the name of it, but she's like, that one cartoon. She said Japanese cartoon, and I thought, and she'd only seen one Japanese cartoon that I can think of, which was Spirited Away.
Lovely.
And so I was like, yes, pretty much all of Hayao Miyazaki's movies have beautiful food moments that actually make you more hungry than live action food sometimes.
Yeah.
And Ratatouille is another example, and not Japanese animated, but animated movie. That's a very high-grossing Pixar film. So.
Oh yeah. One of my favorite food moments in a movie is during Hook, when he's with the Lost Boys and he's trying to understand like their ideas about envisioning food that isn't there, and he's kind of breaking past his like self-imposed sort of adulthood. Like, this is nonsense. These kids are so immature. They need to go to school. They need discipline. And eventually he just lets himself think and imagine, and then he sees the same food that they do. I think that's a great moment. You hate that movie, though.
Not a fan of that movie, but I appreciate... only scenes I really ever remember with any fondness are ones with the Lost Boys.
Yeah.
It's kind of, Rufio in particular. Everybody wanted to be Rufio. So we're not really talking about those. Not really talking about the animated movies, of which there are plenty. There's also a series that we'll probably get into later. There's an anime series called Food Wars. We're going to get to that later. So basically we picked out, was it 5 or 6 movies?
Yes.
And they were, a lot of them were just listed as, like, if you punch in the best food movies into Google, these come up. And the thing I figured out that they sort of have in common, and it's more or less, some much more, some much less, and we'll actually argue about this later. But in general, these kind of fit the idea of magical realism. Magical realism is one of those stylistic terms like science fiction that critics will happily argue to define, but who knows what it really, really means. Like, there are prime examples, and then there are all these examples on the edges of the frame, like, well, does this count?
Yes.
For our purposes, I'm thinking of it as my purposes.
This is you.
It's a real world setting with some kind of supernatural element that fits the world. It's sort of light fantasy is another way to think about it. It's usually not multiple crazy things going on, but like one crazy thing.
Yes.
And I think an example I thought up is spaghetti westerns are these highly textured worlds that they look like ours, and they even have the same histories as ours.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who have these supernatural gun shooting powers.
Yes.
And while the people in the movie are impressed by that,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, oh my god, we just saw a superhero. It's not like in Superman when someone sees Superman flying,
Yes.
everybody freaks the fuck out, because that's more of a science fiction or fantasy movie.
In a spaghetti western, people are going to be like, huh, how about that?
Oh shit, I can't fight this guy, he's too good of a shot. Instead of, holy crap, he shot 12 bullets out of a gun that holds 6 and hit my hat
Whoa.
every single time. Yeah, it's not like they saw a UFO. And so, and then the other interesting thing that happened is we ended up with this collection of movies, and I realized they fit almost a perfect decade. It's technically 11 years, and they're all different countries. We have 2 movies that we disagree with the idea of magical fantasy of.
Correct.
And they're not the first one we're going to cover here, which is Jûzô Itami's Tampopo from 1985. And we're doing this in chronological order like I usually do. And I mean, there are food-themed movies before 1985, some that might even be mystical realism, plenty that you're thinking of off the top of your head right now. For whatever reason, a lot of this sort of golden decade for food movies starts in the mid-'80s and ends in the mid-'90s. And
Yes.
I have no idea why that happens, but it's the way it goes. And Tampopo is a pretty famous movie. It describes itself on its advertising as a ramen western to make fun of the term spaghetti western.
But there are so many other genres.
Right. But it's really, Jacques Tati is the best description, even though it's Japanese. It's very humorous French New Wave era, kind of very playful movie.
It has vignettes that are of a certain style,
Right.
revolving around this one story about this woman who wants to improve a ramen shop.
Yeah, so it's sort of a somewhere between Mary Poppins, which if they didn't go into the chalk painting, I feel like would be magical realism, because she's like the one magical thing that can do stuff.
But she acts like she's kind of annoyed by it, I've noticed.
Yeah.
With like, God, this chalk
She's seen
painting.
it before.
Yeah.
But in this case, yeah, there are 2 truck drivers, Goro and Gun. And Gun's actually Ken Watanabe, very young Ken Watanabe. And they happen upon this woman who wants to become a great ramen chef.
Yes.
And they're it's sort of a reversed version of Mary Poppins, where she's the normal person and everyone else around her is a Mary Poppins trying to impart wisdom onto her with their abilities.
Yep. I looked at it as being like gathering a perfect team of specialists who are good at one thing. And then you found that there was a Pygmalion sort of.
Pygmalion or My Fair Lady,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a little bit like that, where people are trying to take this sort of downtrodden woman and build her up into this.
And build up her son too. Her
Yeah.
son has stuff going on.
But it's sort of like the cuteness of it is that everybody's just sort of doing it out of the goodness of their heart.
Yes.
And that she's genuinely a sweet person that really wants to help people, but she still has agency in everything she's doing.
Yes.
There's scenes where she'll be trying to figure out how to do the noodles correctly, so she'll trick a guy at a rival noodle shop into explaining how he did his noodles. Or she has one friend who will go through the trash to figure out what they got.
Yes.
And so, and it's also kind of has that thing that happens in like, I notice in Japanese action anime where enemies will become friends.
Yes.
Easily. There's like the trucker and then there's another man who hate each other and become.
They're like rivals.
Yeah, he's like a
do
low.
Do you like her?
Yeah.
Do you really like her? Why are you involved with her? I like her.
But they end up connecting to help her.
Yes. He does hit her interiors.
Yeah.
Of her restaurant, not her.
Not her interior. No. No. In fact, while this is happening, so that movie is probably. This is a just under 2 hour movie. You thought of
interiors, and then you thought of the gangster part.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is that I was going to say there's not a lot of sex in this movie, and there's technically not.
Technically, there's
but
innuendo.
One of the ongoing, because it's basically like a 1 hour movie with almost another hour of subplots that never really connect and vignettes.
Yeah.
And one of the subplots is a guy and his I can't remember. Are they like cheating?
Mm,
Gangster and his love. I just know it's a yakuza and his lover, and I don't know if it's like a forbidden romance.
I don't think so. They have like dates. They meet
Okay.
in the hotel room, not necessarily like a we have to hide away our love. His heavies know about it too.
Right.
They want to service him and her as a couple. I thought it was totally legit.
Okay.
She was like a gangster mall to me.
And so everything in this movie, the main storyline, is about food and how to make the food, and then this storyline is basically a yakuza movie, a 60s, 70s yakuza movie, with it still has the violence, but like the sex scenes are all replaced with eating.
Yes.
And so it's all about eating as an act of sex, including a pretty famous and grotesque scene where they crack an egg yolk and share it between their mouths over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Which is funny, watching it the first time we saw this movie was during the height of COVID.
Yeah.
And it was especially gross then.
Yeah. How much do you know about her?
Yeah.
Do you really want to do this?
Um,
The other concept I kept seeing come up both in the main story and the vignettes was the fact that how pleasurable it is to have a food that's withheld from you. Like it was with the guy who was behind the kind of like curtain or partition at this one noodle place where the woman said she was going to the bank and she said he can't have the tempura, he can't have the duck, he can't have this, he can't have that, but that's what he orders, but then he chokes on it. But how good it was to be able to like sate himself with that. And the kid who can't have ice cream, he has to have his carrot on his string. And then how good it is that he was able to have ice cream.
right. Some of the other vignettes are there's a woman who's on her deathbed,
Yes.
and the doctor's like she's done for, and her husband is desperate, and he tells her that she needs to make dinner for her family. So she gets off the deathbed and makes them fried rice,
Yes.
and then keels over.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a sort of satire of that type of drama, those like melodramatic.
The family type.
Yeah,
things.
super melodramatic movies. But then you have this moment where she is able to cook something, and then the children are crying, and the father's shouting at them, "You have to finish your meal. It's the last one she'll ever make, Fred." And then my favorite part is when there's a grocery store clerk, and a little old woman comes in,
Oh yeah.
and she starts squeezing food. And certain food is satisfying to squeeze, and some isn't.
Yes.
And he's trying to stop her, but she like is staying out of.
She is so quick.
She's too quick for him, and so it's set up kind of like a shootout.
Yeah.
Like he's like hiding underneath things and behind things, and he finally gets over and catches her
Gets her with a fly swatter.
and hits her with a fly swatter. Yeah, I love that whole sequence. And then there's one that's a little bit like what did you say? It was like
Like a heist.
a heist movie about a guy who has a con man who does a thing where he pretends he's a professor that is needed for this business needs him for something.
Yes.
And
To fund it, basically.
to fund it, and they pay for his expensive meal, and then while they're in the bathroom, he robs them, and he gets captured by the police.
He just wants one more dumpling.
One more.
No, he wants mushu.
One more mushu pancake.
Yes.
And it's more than implied. It's stated that this is like his shtick, and he's done it multiple times.
So good. The older people, the elders of this movie, the actors are just given these wonderful jobs.
Yeah, and
They're like acting against type and acting very young, despite their appearances. I love that part.
and it's a very sweet movie all around, and it's cute, and I don't know. I think it has scenes like as a non-chef, the scenes that are describing how to make the perfect ramen.
Yes.
Make sense to me. And to me, it's one of those movies that makes me very hungry, even when it's doing like the showing us how the sausage is made,
Correct.
which is the part that I don't deal well with very well. Butchering animals. I'm not very good with butchering animals.
Correct.
The one scene I can't take is when they kill the little soft-shelled turtle. I can't deal with that one, but otherwise, the already killed animals that they're butchering, that stuff, like, they can go through that whole process, it still looks super tasty, so.
Good to know.
I don't know, from what you know about ramen making, is it a successful how to?
I think so. I think ramen is made in a lot of different ways. What am I trying to say? Different ways similar to this. There's different kinds of broths. There's ultimately more steaming pots of different types of broth than what she had, which seemed like she went between two different things and different toppings and
Yeah.
one big batch of noodles. I think you need to go between ramen, soba, rice noodles, egg noodles, spicy broth, pork broth. Basically, there's more going on in your average ramen shop than what she was depicting. Hers was very classic, very stall-like, versus a restaurant having more pots on the stove.
Right, and so I guess the ramen shops we go to aren't exactly shops, and
No.
it's not the 80s.
No, there's a giant dining room.
Yeah, so we got some good ramen here in Minnesota, but it's
We're
probably
mostly known for our pho, but the ramen's good too.
yeah, and it seems like pho and ramen have sort of similar ideals behind them,
Yeah.
but
The
different.
broths, the way they're made is very specific.
Yeah, different kinds of noodles.
Different kinds of meats, different kinds of ways of presenting the meat. You can have organ meat in there, for example.
Which one of those things I don't like to think about and just eat and don't think about it. So yeah, do you have anything else about this particular movie?
Well, with every movie, I wanted to close out with what ingredients make the specific cuisine. Like this being Japanese cuisine, I thought about its foundational ingredients being rice, noodles, soybeans, seaweed, creating the umami flavor, the fifth flavor through soy sauce and mushrooms, different kinds of meat, different kinds of seafood, the concept of sushi as fish versus sushi rolls or things like that. Different kinds of vegetables. They use a lot of gourds, a lot of pumpkin, wasabi, rice wine, vinegars, and rice vinegars, rice alcohol, and sake. And one of my favorite parts of Japanese food is the fact that they have a lot of convenience food and they have a lot of snacks that are ready to eat. I just love that concept about Japanese food, how they're able to manufacture snacks and like foods you can eat right away, like ramen.
So it's a mix of a culinary thing that begins on an island nation that's very damp and that closes itself off to a lot of the world for a lot of its history, and then leads into the fact that it's one of the most industrious
Yes, for sure.
environments.
Yes.
So people are always on the move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yep, that's the reason for having convenience food and stalls for restaurants, because why cook at home when you have all these restaurants around you?
All right, so that is our first movie. Our second movie is Babette's Feast by Gabriel Axel. I might be mispronouncing that because it is Danish. And it's based on the novel by Isaac Dinesen, or Isaac.
You'll fix it in post. I know.
I don't know anything about how to pronounce Danish words, unfortunately. Hey, I looked it up after we recorded, and that was a pen name for Karen Blixen, who wrote both the book and the screenplay. Back to our show.
We don't know no Danes.
This is a Oscar-nominated. This is a very special. I mean, Tampopo everybody loves, but this is prestigious. 1987, so a couple years after. And this is one that you didn't think fit our...
It's not magical, Gabe.
She doesn't think it's magical.
No.
I think that it's set up so much like because it's based on a story, but based on a book, it has such a fairy tale quality to the narrative. And I think it's heavily implied that there are magical things going on around what's happening.
You
Lots
can't
of
hear this, readers, but or listeners, I'm nodding along with them. I'm not taking this in as true at all.
Well, yeah, okay. So this is a big story that's compacted, and it's a
long period of time.
Yeah. So there's
like the sisters are like three different actresses, I think.
Yeah, 19th century Denmark.
Yes.
They these two sisters that are their father is the pastor, and everybody on this area is particularly religious.
Yes.
And over the years they have suitors, and then other stuff happens. Like they kind of cram a lot of that into the first 30 minutes.
Yes. It's implied that whoever is attracted to the sisters meets some sort of demise either with their hobby or their employment or their career, and they go off and away from the village as different people.
Right, which to me is sort of magical. One of the suitors is a baritone from Paris,
Mm-hmm.
and he sort of bequeaths them years and years later.
Mm-hmm.
His housekeeper slash chef.
Correct, and she's more of a refugee than
Right.
the queen. He entrusts
He entrusts
their
them.
care on this woman who escaped some sort of.
It's the
violence.
It's the revolution is happening in Paris, and she's a
Yes.
counter-revolutionary because he's a rich person.
Yes.
And her name is Babette, and they can't have her we can't afford to do this. But she insists, and
I'll be in service to you,
Mhm.
and you don't have to worry about anything. And something that I put about the villagers who don't leave, they just stay there. They meet as kind of like a village brain trust, and they meet with their
Yeah.
father, the priest, and they're very God-fearing people. They're very humble. But over time, Babette's there. She starts to endear herself to the different villagers, the shopkeepers, the fishmongers, and she drives a hard bargain with fish, and she saves the sisters a lot of money. And then over time, they're feeding like the poor and the people who aren't able to like fend for themselves. And over time, these poor people are like, this isn't good enough.
Yeah.
I want something better because Babette like makes such good food, and the stuff that they get like gruel and stuff isn't good.
And like Tampopo, I just realized now that these are both title characters. Like
Yes.
Tampopo, Babette sort of brings joy with her.
Yeah.
And the it's not even subtext, it's text. The text of the piece is really that these super pious people are afraid that the joy they get from her cooking and her
Yes.
presence is sinful.
Yes.
And that's another sort of, what if Mary Poppins ended up in a pious area instead of a guy who's ignoring his children for business? What if it was like a priest who's ignoring his pastor who's ignoring his children,
goodness sakes.
and he's like, no, you're teaching them to have too much fun. So it's a little bit not Flashdance. What's the one with Kevin Bacon?
Footloose.
Footloose. It's a little bit Footloose with food.
Oh, no. I didn't even see it that way.
I just thought of it this minute. I didn't have that anywhere in my notes.
But the dad in Footloose stays alive the whole time.
Right.
He dies in the early quarter of Babette's feast. He's
Right.
not around.
But it's a little bit like
But they frequently talk about the priest in conversation, like, oh, so-and-so used to say this, and we should all live like that.
right. And so the feast, which is basically the last hour of the movie almost, Babette wins a lottery.
Yes.
10,000
francs.
10,000 francs. And everybody assumes she's going to leave, and she wants to throw them one final feast.
Yes.
And it's a proper French.
In the name of their father,
Yeah.
to celebrate him.
It's a proper French multi-course meal.
Multi-course, correct.
And there's like the one really like the closest movie gets to fantasy is the nightmare sequence that one sister
I'm
has.
like, Hitchcock!
Yeah,
oh
it's
my
like and where
gosh.
she's like they're gonna go to hell because they're enjoying her food too much.
Mm-hmm.
So they all have second thoughts about the food.
Yes.
But the way of getting around it is it would be impolite to not eat Babette's feast.
Mm-hmm. But you can't
They
emote.
They can't emote or talk about it.
Yes.
And the funny part is that while they're trying not to emote, they've also invited this former suitor of the other sister, who doesn't know that this is the deal they're going with. And he keeps explaining how amazing this thing she's made or how perfect the wine is.
And he's like, look at them like, it's good, right? And they're like...
And they're just trying really hard not to have any emotion. And it's like the kind of thing that if it was a movie that was directly anti-piracy, they would probably have ended in an orgy. But instead, it's a movie that, or a story that is saying these people are too pious.
Yes.
But they're allowed to be a little superstitious and a little overly religious. So it really ends with them sort of accepting that they are enjoying the food and that it's not sinful.
And then what helps is that another part of the thing that you thought makes this movie magical is that the man who's a lieutenant, he's like remembering this restaurant he used to go into in Paris about how they had a chef and how a lot of these dishes are the same as that chef or that restaurant that he went to.
Yeah, it's definitely Ratatouille definitely had parts of Babette's Feast in mind when they made it. Not like scene by scene, but there's a sort of a similarity in their vibes. And I think it's implied that she's putting love into this food and that it's helping change their hearts.
Yeah.
I think that she has a sort of magical force. So if this is magical realism, it is light magical realism. It's like I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but it's like the light end of it. It's like a superhero movie, but it's really just a vigilante. He doesn't really have any powers.
Sure. I'm rich.
Yeah, not even that. It's like Kick-Ass. It's just people,
sure.
just people taking it upon themselves, that kind of thing. Yeah. So though, I this was out of my comfort zone, and I was a little afraid of it because it's so well known.
Never once said that.
Yeah, well, I don't know a lot about Danish film. And I wasn't raised Christian, so there's a lot of that stuff that goes over my head.
This is almost like Orthodox, just like Orthodox, like Christianity, where you have to be very firm, very, it'd almost be like Church of Denmark if there was like a Church of England counterpart. They're wearing black all the time, they're very pious, central on being humble and spendthrift, I guess you could say, and not really giving notice to like earthly delights.
Right, but it's not a particularly challenging movie to watch unless you're super opposed to subtitles. You just cannot stand them. It's funny in a way that you don't have to understand the cultural significance of things to get the jokes.
I think it won me over with its philosophy. It's like reeking with philosophy, especially at the end with its final like dinners.
It's very cathartic.
Yeah,
the thing about the food,
just dug that.
and something that happens in Tampopo, but not to this degree because there's multiple meal eatings in Tampopo, is the way that this meal sort of builds into this sort of release of happiness for these characters. The thing at the end is that it turns out she spent all of her money that she won on this one feast.
All these ingredients, yes.
So she gave her entire self over.
Do you remember when I saw that's Veuve de Clicquot? I immediately recognized what that champagne was.
Right.
And despite it being, hundreds of, or 100 years ago, I was like, oh my God, that's the same.
Yeah.
So it kind of ticked one on my, prior culinary degree experience. Like, I know Veuve Clicquot on site. I know what that food is. So.
Well, yeah, and so as far as, this is a Danish film, and we see some Danish food, but it's like the bad end of Danish food.
Yeah, like
I don't.
fish.
Yeah, like dried, not
that's
lied
right. They dry
fish,
it out. They dry
which
it out on, like sticks.
is like my least favorite thing in the world. Pickled or lied fish.
Keep it long.
And bread soup that has like no flavor. So I don't think it's really representative of Danish cuisine, but
really,
it's about the French cuisine.
Yes.
So with your little thing, what are the qualities of French food?
Well, okay. French cuisine is it's presented with butter, white wine, herb de Provence. I have a couple bottles of it in our own pantry, using creamy and savory sauces like the mother sauces, crusty breads, onions, shallots, leeks, a little bit of garlic, not a lot, mirepoix, the trinity of celery, carrots, and onions, capers, aged cheeses, kind of like harder cheeses, but then again you have blue cheeses, using sauté is a French word, and pastries and cakes that have a lot of butter, a lot of milk, a lot of fat.
I actually had a friend at my previous office job who was taking a culinary class, and he quit because he couldn't stand how much butter they had him put in things.
Dude, get ready.
Yeah. He's like, nah, this isn't for me.
Not for everyone.
Yeah, Babette's Feast sounds challenging based on all its awards and blah, 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 based on a novel, but it's easy to watch movie and really charming and
you
sweet.
Learn stuff.
Yeah, and again, as the outsider, it doesn't teach me how to make the food.
No, it's extremely complicated.
As much as
The
shows
quails
me
alone.
what goes into making the food.
Yes.
And it looks very good, and I wanted to eat
She
it
has
right
two
there.
sous chefs, which is insane. Otherwise, she made everything.
Yeah, and
For,
they're
like,
they're
about
not
10
trained.
people. No.
They're just
No.
they're both there's like the kids from the area, right?
Yes.
And then the other guy is the coachman, or
That's right. Who
for-
comes with the
yeah.
lieutenant?
So
Yes.
neither of them are really know what
No.
they're doing.
They're like drinking the wine, bringing the dishes to the table, and
It's also one of those movies where you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop.
like
The other
something's
shoe,
gonna burn.
yeah, something's gonna
Someone's
burn.
gonna get upset.
It never happens.
No.
It's just a
Goes
big
exactly.
release.
Yeah.
It's just a good fun time.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's Babette's Feast. So yeah, that's our first argument on how much it fits the idea of magical realism. The next movie is the last one we watched, and we almost didn't watch it. It was kind of a last minute thing, which is one of my favorites that I wasn't sure if counted as a food movie.
Oh, it does.
Is Peter Greenaway's The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. I actually have two personal stories about this one. Twice in my life, someone asked me to borrow the DVD. I guess it went out of print a long time ago, and people have heard of it. And both times, people returned it to me and were very angry at me, as if I had made the film and made them borrow it, because it is a very harsh
It's very
film.
brash.
Yeah, it's a harsh film.
Mm-hmm.
And the other story I have is when it came out in 1989. I think it probably didn't hit the U.S. until 90.
Yeah, it took a while.
So so I would say the last one was a Danish film about French cuisine, and this is going to be a UK film about French cuisine as well.
Yes.
It came out, and the idea that at the end someone has cooked and eaten was, I think it was Siskel and Ebert that sort of just spoiled that for everybody.
Yes.
And so I remember being at the dinner table. We would go to my grandparents every Sunday when I was a kid, so I would have been 9 or 10. And my grandfather saying he went and saw it and loved it. And my mom, only really knowing that it was an X-rated or NC-17 rated movie where someone is eaten, thought it was just... And how could you have enjoyed this movie about eating people? I don't understand. She was so upset. So in my little mind, I just thought the whole movie was about eating people. And I ended up seeing the movie Delicatessen by Jean-Pierre Jeunet and Jean Caro, which is not really a food movie. It kept on being on lists I would see online. I just don't think of it as a food movie.
Right.
Which is about cannibalism, and I think I thought that was the movie they were talking about. And then I finally found a copy of The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Lover, which was edited. I knew there was an R-rated edit. I didn't know until just yesterday that they cut almost 30 minutes out of the movie.
Miss so much.
I don't know how, but the Blockbuster version, I'm glad I never rented that. So I've always seen the uncut version. But I remember being like a teenager, or it's probably 1918, and waiting for them to eat somebody. It's literally the last thing that happens in the movie. It's the end of the movie. It's probably 4 minutes of... Actually, the actual eating is one bite that he can't even swallow. So I just remember being like, what? But this is one of those movies that's been a favorite for a long time that I never really thought about critically. I never really thought about why I liked it or what it means, because it's Peter Greenaway. I've never really sat down with any of his other movies, but they're dense. I know they're dense.
For sure.
I read a little blippet in the 1001 Movies to Read Before You Die that describes it as a movie about Thatcherism, but doesn't explain anything beyond that. So I'm like, okay, it's about Thatcherism. This time I watched it, this is about Thatcherism. And yeah, it's about they don't say exactly what kind of... The thief, quote, the thief, the Michael Gambon character, is some sort of mafia type guy.
Yes.
Like, not very high level.
Not really, no.
And so he is
He
representative
thinks
of...
he's high level.
Yeah, he's representative of a shitty politician, a shitty Tory politician, basically, sort of. And he is a blowhard. He never shuts up. And he thinks... He's super xenophobic to the point where he thinks everybody wants to talk. But there's actually a lot of Donald Trump in him, I noticed. The way he has to keep talking.
Yes.
Like, the way that when you see Trump talking and he just keeps yammering.
Yes.
And people just cheer every once in a while, like, and so like he's just yammering, and people are just sitting around him, and which is not something I don't think of that as being a Thatcher thing, but I guess Thatcher people were that way.
Sure.
I don't know. I didn't live in the UK in the 80s, but so I kind of got that xenophobia stuff, but then like this idea that these upper crust people who are running things, because he has bought this restaurant.
Yes.
Run by this Frenchman. And he goes there every day with his poor wife, who we know he physically and sexually abuses and berates. And he forces all these people to just sit down with him and just listen to him talk constantly.
Pretty much, yeah.
And he talks about what makes good food, and he doesn't know what he's saying. He just wants the expensive food.
The best of everything, yeah.
He tries to buy... flatware, and he gets like crappy gold flatware because it looks flashy, but it just breaks.
Yes.
So yeah, he doesn't really know anything. And so the chef will make her like a very special, simple looking, but
like a terrine almost.
Yeah, and he'll make fun of it because it's not what he considers fancy, which I suppose would be something that your boorish right-wing people would be like in the 80s. I vaguely remember that being the case in America, that you had stuff like sushi became something that conservative
It was like
yuppies...
the dusk or like the sunset of like steakhouses.
Yeah.
Where your food had to be really big and really like in your face, and like you had to have a full belly, versus gourmet and French things. You're satisfied, but it's small amounts of food set in. Literally, they had a days of the week, course by course menu of what they were being fed.
But I think also something happened in the 80s in America when we were growing up. I had an uncle that was a verified yuppie, and the way he treated food, and that's part of why sushi started to become popular.
Yes.
It was very expensive, and it was a status symbol. And it's like, and I think that a lot of what in this, so the cook in this is sort of just going along with it, but he's not enjoying it.
The other thing is that he's aware of, like, he's purveyed by these people.
Yes.
And they're paying off, like, critics and different people that say they're against, like, code violations.
Right.
And there's food rotting all around them in, like, these huge lorry trucks, and people are being paid not to look at them.
Yeah, he, the movie starts with the Michael Gambon character having acquired, quote unquote, all of this meat.
Yes.
That he didn't ask for, that the chef did not ask for. And the chef won't use it. Yeah. So it just sits out back rotting, and it sort of becomes representative of the rot of the movie.
Oh, good.
So
yeah.
On a meta level, like, we haven't even gotten into the his wife and her lover part of the story, but on a meta level, it's about this shitty, horrible person who is in power and exerts his power more and more and keeps ruining this place of art. He has this big garish sign. He has a friend of his who's a higher up criminal guy of some type that suggests they have entertainment. So he uses his pimp guy, who's played by a fucking sexy Syrian Hines.
So,
Jesus Christ!
Like awesome.
He's like a musketeer.
I saw him as being like a traveler or like a gypsy, or like
beautiful facial hair and
Mick
long
Fleetwood,
hair.
Sort of like, let me lure you away with my loot sort of man.
Yeah, but he's a pimp,
so
apparently.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was playing a pimp. He gets the pimp to bring it. So he's ruining it with this horrible floor show by sex workers who are not singers being brought in to sing. So, there's a little bit of snobbery behind, I think, what Greenaway is trying to say about art and how people are ruining art with lower art, I think is kind of going on too, which I don't like.
Yeah.
But there's still the better meta commentary that the people in power who don't know what they're talking about, who have all the money and power, are ruining everybody else's time.
Yeah, and they're turning their back on the people who work in the back of house, who almost look like they're slaving away. And there's like this Oliver character who's like the chorus for some of the parts where they go back in the kitchen. He's like, singing so sadly about
he sings
things.
A specific psalm that I don't remember what it was, but he's singing a specific psalm over and over again.
Right.
And so as the movie carries on, he gets a bigger and bigger entourage, but then he starts getting paranoid about losing power and losing power over things, specifically his wife.
Yes.
And he gets angrier and more violent until by the end of the movie, his entire thing has shrunk to basically his mother and his stupidest...
That was his mom?
I believe that's supposed to be his mom.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that's supposed to be his mom.
She does say, like, my Albert a couple times.
And his stupidest henchman, played by Tim Roth.
Still sexy, though.
Yeah, but he's supposed to be like a boy.
Yeah.
The idea the Tim Roth character is supposed to just like. There's a point when Helen Mirren, who plays the wife, says like he says you're being rude to Tim Roth, and she says he's just mimicking you like he always does.
Exactly.
And so I think Tim Roth's supposed to represent all the idiots who don't really know what they're saying
coming
about,
up in politics,
and who just listen to the xenophobic stuff and just absorb it and take it in, and then do horrible things
in their name.
I mean, they could stand for the weird National Front skinhead people that they had in the UK in the 80s.
Possibly.
This is made in '89, so we're at the end of Thatcherism, and I don't think that skinhead thing was quite as big then. But
not really. No.
I mean, Tim Roth did actually play a British skinhead, and I can't remember what that movie was called, but
Me neither.
that was one of his earliest big roles. So I could see that being that. So anyway.
Yes, Gabe.
The other part of the story is his wife and her lover.
Yes.
So Helen Mirren plays the wife, and she
looks amazing all the time.
Yeah. I mean, this is '89, but she's probably in her mid to late 40s by now. I don't know.
Possibly.
I have no
Couldn't
idea.
even guess.
Who could guess how old
care.
Helen Mirren is?
Don't care.
At any given time in her career. But she's this put upon, abused woman. And we find out later she's even tried to run away.
Yes.
She's just she is a very, for how outrageous the movie is, she's a pretty typical stand-in for an abused spouse.
Yes.
And she's
had to like harden herself.
Yes.
Against her husband.
And there's another patron who's always at the restaurant, the lover, who
always reading books.
Is always reading books. He's bookish, and so it's another case of, I think, Greenaway being a little bit of a snob. Like, this guy only cares about these things, but this guy cares about the finer things in life. Books.
And Spica audibly says, like, "Why do you care about books?
Yeah.
There's no point in this. This is a bunch of He doesn't care.
Yeah. So the two of them sort of make eye contact and then awkwardly run into each other at the bathroom.
Which is a different color than the dining room.
Yeah, I haven't even gotten into the visuals yet. They run into each other at the bathroom. They end up starting an affair, and then every night, since they eat every night of the week at this place, they have a new affair. And the chef, who is, I believe, Richard Bohringer, in his name is Richard in the actual movie.
Yes.
There was a story that they were going to name all the characters after the actors, but... and so the lover is named Michael because Michael Gambon was going to play that character, but he kind of aged out of it. And the Gambon character is named Albert because it was going to be Albert Finney. And they start an affair. That's what most people think is the NC-17 part of the movie. It's basically just full frontal nudity. It's not particularly racy, honestly. No. It's sexy. It's pretty, but it's not like X-rated by any means. So
I don't think so.
I remember thought that was kind of crazy. So they carry on this affair, and the staff is basically helping them with the affair.
Yes.
And they get found out, and then they have to escape, and they run away, and they hide.
That part that you're talking about and kind of like rushing past is what makes me think it's like Shakespearean, because the girl who is with Corey the pimp, Syrian Hines, she notices them through a window and says, "Oh, I do believe our we're going to go up a little bit higher in this gang because I see something that the boss Spica needs to know about." And so she tells him, and Corey is just really upset.
Well, she actually tells him out of anger, though, because he's insulting her.
Also Shakespearean.
Yeah.
The girls are just wanting to speak the truth and say what they've seen, and the men are like, "No, you don't understand this inner hierarchy." But eventually the husband finds out and goes to their den of lovemaking, and while he sends this is just so Shakespearean, that he sends her away to somewhere else to check on the kid who was hurt or was attacked by his gang, and then he goes and...
Yeah, the boy, the Oliver boy is bringing them food at their love nest and is attacked. And really, it's almost the hardest to watch scene in the movie. It's because this kid who can actually sing, and so he can scream, too. And it's another case where they don't show you anything, but it's implied.
It's heartbreaking when he goes, "Ah!"
Yeah.
Just the highest part of the scream is just
Yeah.
like, gosh, who's going through terrible stuff.
And then if you're saying it's Shakespearean, you think of plays, and
Yes.
it's set up like a play, and I think that's why I always liked it, even
Very
before
open,
I thought about
huge
it.
frame staging, a curtain closing at the end. Yes.
Yeah, it's a huge. Basically, it's like they took a giant stage and they built upon it. I think I count 6 stages.
Mhm.
There might be 7 if the place where they're making love in the kitchen is a separate set, but I'm not sure if it is. But it's
Understand.
basically the outside behind, which is, and the costumes change with every room.
Yes.
So outside behind is sort of sickly area where there's rabid dogs and all the meat rotting, and that's where the sexual abuse happens.
Yes.
And they always wear green back there.
No, they wear green.
They wear blue and black back there. That's right.
Correct. And then they wear green in the kitchen.
Green in the kitchen, which is mostly green colored. It's interesting because it has such high ceiling, way higher than a kitchen would be.
Yes.
It's the one that looks the most like a set, I think.
Yes.
You can see like the rafters and stuff, basically. And then they got it into the dining room is red, and everybody will be wearing red. And the bathroom is white, and they'll be wearing white. I'm sure that's some sort of irony on virginalism because they have sex in the bathroom.
Or because porcelain is white.
Yeah. And there's a men and women's bathroom, but the only difference is
Yeah.
the urinals.
No real difference.
And then there's the bookkeeper Michael's his store, which is just it's a whole bunch of books, and it's brownish, but nobody wears clothes there.
No.
And so it has these sets, and so it's very stagey, and there'll be camera tricks in between. There'll be very long takes and very few close-ups.
Yes.
The close-ups are a lot fewer than you see, and a lot fewer cuts. Cuts usually for either for point of view is the most common cut. Not a lot of cuts in the movie. A lot of times the camera will stay on the same axis for a lot of the movie, where it will just be pulled alongside as if it is in front of the stage, being pulled from one side to the other, left or right. And then when you do go to a close-up, it's sort of jarring almost.
Yes, it is.
And then the book suppository, the book depository.
Well, it becomes suppository when he's being killed, which is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, actually. If you had to choose, what book would you want to be choked to death with?
Well, okay, so yeah, he's captured and he's murdered by... and actually, as things are going on, this is where Gambone starts losing his gang.
Yes.
Because first he attacks a child and some of them leave.
They're really upset.
And then he gets Tim Roth to get a wooden spoon, and shove pages of a book down Michael's throat until it kills him.
And Helen Mirren is like, that's his favorite book.
Yeah, it's the French Revolution. I have no idea what you would cram to... my favorite book? I wouldn't want to be killed by my favorite book.
That's why I was like, what, symbolic book? Like, if it could be a book that, ends the author's career, what would you want it to be?
Oh, God. Some, book by some weird right-wing...
That's what I was thinking. I was like, Bill O'Reilly book. That would
No,
be
beyond
fabulous.
him. One of the really crazy ones. Yeah. But so, yeah, he dies, and she... she confesses to his dead body all the horrible things she's been through.
Yes.
Then convinces the chef to cook him and force Albert to eat him.
That's when I was really in awe of the open stage sort of concept, because they pull back really far and you can see this huge table that they are just directly in the middle of, and it seems like it kind of embodies her plight and what she wants the chef to do. It's like, I know this is a big deal and you shouldn't do this. This is how I want to have revenge on my husband. And
he doesn't want to do it until he thinks that she wants to imbibe her lover.
Correct. She's like,
and then
no.
as soon as he figures out, then he's in with it. And then, the another thing about the stage design is at the end, everybody comes back. Every member of the cast comes back, and it's just him, Tim Roth, and his mom, and everybody else who hates him now on the other side.
Right.
And so you can have this wide shot with all of these people.
Yes.
So I kind of feel like I get what makes it, and for me, and so the note I made myself, and I think the other thing I really like about it is that I feel like it's a movie about contrasts too, visually speaking at least. And so it's the contrast between the colors, the contrast between divine and grotesque, so beautiful food and then people vomiting and rotten food, people having sex, people being murdered.
Yes.
There's a contrast between Albert and Michael, obviously. Michael doesn't even speak for the first
Half
hour of the movie. The contrast between his silence and the empty boasts. And sex and violence. Like, I think that's because it's such an extreme movie in that standpoint. I think that's what I've always liked about it too.
Since this deals with as much about French cooking as Babette's Feast did, I was like kind of scrambling at first. Like, what am I gonna like talk about as being like highlighted ingredients? And I'm like, of course, it's right in front of me. He talks all about how expensive food is the best food. So I'm like, what are expensive ingredients? It's like shelled seafood, lobster, caviar, wagyu beef, foie gras, saffron, vanilla. A big one that I didn't expect was barnacles. People pay a lot for barnacles.
I guess you have to get them off a whale.
Or ships, or something that's...
Maybe they're better depending on what they're stuck to.
Exactly.
I've never had a barnacle. I have no idea.
I've never met a barnacle. I didn't know. And then the fresh like shoots of like or stalks of hop, like, you know, hops that you make beer out of. You really just use like this kind of like fluffy bit, like at the end of a piece of wheat or something. But the shoots of it, the fresh part of it, like imagine a bamboo shoot but having it be like of a hop, that the actual freshness of it, because it's not aged, because it's not like brewed, it's very expensive. Other than that, Iberico ham, pork, coffee, the civet coffee that's pooped out, and then you just harvest that.
Gross.
Yeah, you know civet coffee.
Well, truffles are the thing I always know about.
Truffles for sure.
Yeah.
Shark fin, bird's nest, and then gold leaf, obviously, because gold is expensive. And really, it's about food that's prized for how rare it is, how hard it is to find and procure and age. Specific harvest times, specific like hybridization of different things, and grown specific seasons. And then I realized, or I noticed, that there was a point where Michael Gambon or Spica was talking about black foods are expensive. I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, like you said, truffles are black. They can be black sometimes. White ones are a little bit more rare. But then there's also, I looked it up, there's also black caviar, but there's also black watermelon. And black chicken is...
I've seen black chicken before, yeah.
Yeah, they're just like stark black, and their meat is almost black.
Yeah, and that scene where she asks the chef, while she's trying to get him to cook Michael's dead body, she's asking him what the most expensive foods are. And he does bring up diet foods, too.
That's right, he did.
And I think that's supposed to be a dig in general at that yuppie cuisine of that... you know, they were going into the 90s at this point. There wasn't as much of the yuppie cuisine, but the middle 80s had all of this
small portion sizes,
just like food that not that food fads are an inherently 80s thing, but that particular decade's food fads were a lot of diet things that didn't need to be as expensive as they were. And after Albert dies, the camera the curtain literally comes down. So, and it's a sort of fantasy world. So I don't. This one's the magical realism aspect is really more in the way it's presented.
Yes.
And the fact that people's clothing changes colors between shots, and that again it has this sort of fairy tale vibe to it. But what you call Shakespearean, I think also as fairy tale, where like the evil king and his queen escapes and they go to a tower and she has to get revenge. And
I agree with that.
Yeah. So that brings us to 1992's Like Water for Chocolate. This is a Mexican movie.
I saw so much of my family in this
one. Alfonso Aráu, A-R-A-U.
And then I recognized him when he was on screen at the very beginning. I said, "Hey, Gabe, is that El Guapo from Three Amigos?"
And I'm like, no, this is some like art house dude. And I looked it up. No, this man has had one of the most fascinating careers I can think of. He did the voice of Kaa in the Spanish dub of The Jungle Book. And then 50 years later, he voiced Papa Julio in Coco.
Nice.
He was featured players in The Wild Bunch and El Topo, because they filmed in Mexico. He had big supporting roles in 80s comedies Used Cars, Romancing the Stone, as you said, Three Amigos.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming we don't have the guy who played El Guapo in Three Amigos on his gravestone when he passes, I think he'll probably be best remembered for directing this Like Water for Chocolate, which is a sort of... This one is based on a book and is described as magical realism. So this is one we can't really argue because that's its descriptor.
Yeah, says you.
Well, I mean, no, literally, that's what the book is called. That's the genre of book that it's based on. Anyway, this is the type of movie that really came out of the early mid '90s that like would just sort of... There's something about that area where it was in part because of fucking Harvey Weinstein, but there was a way of selling certain foreign films as important things to watch.
Yes.
And so they would actually make quite a bit of money in America.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of them. I remember my mother being a huge fan of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And actually letting me watch it on video, which I was sort of surprised by. Until we watched it and I realized it has a lot of nudity in it.
Mm-hmm.
But the sex isn't particularly graphic. It's sort of
Not
loving
really.
sex. So I guess she wasn't bothered by that.
Something I noticed about the style too is that it's a lot of reminiscing about your family that you never really knew, like how like family members or ancestors can do like impossible things. It's like a tall tale. They're like, oh, they could cook as good as anybody, and they went through such hardships, but they got through it, and you could taste someone's like love or someone's sadness or anger in their food.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, well, there's also ghosts in this movie.
Yes.
But the basic idea, the thing that makes it magical realism, is that the main character, who is Tita, played by Lumi Cavazos, who I recognized the whole time we were watching it. I finally figured out she's in Bottle Rocket. That was the other thing I had seen her in.
Oh, I see.
She can magically imbue the food she makes with her emotions.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if she realizes that she does it, though.
No, I'm not sure either. But it's very much like a fairy tale in that she is... This movie is like... Whereas Tampopo has a bit of a Pygmalion vibe, this has a Cinderella vibe.
Of sorts.
Where it's not her stepmother, but it is her evil, shitty mother.
And it's based on, like, birth order. I mean, coming from a half Mexican background, there's, like, specific roles that you need to fulfill based on your birth order, being the oldest, being the youngest. Her being the middle?
No, she was the youngest.
Youngest.
Yeah.
She has to take care of her mother as she ages.
Yeah.
And she cannot marry. She cannot get involved with anyone. Her only goal throughout her life is to take care of her mom.
Which is very Cinderella-esque, where Cinderella is adopted by this woman who values her children above her, and she just acts as their housekeeper, near borderline slave the entire time.
And she basically sells off the oldest child to someone that the youngest is interested in.
Yes.
In order to, like, kind of thwart it off. Like, you know, he's taken, you can't mess with him. But no, for the rest of their marriage, she pines for the guy.
Yeah. This is it's another one that, because it's based on a book, it's very sort of episodic in the way it kind of moves through the story. But I don't think it does this bad.
I only really noticed it at the end when it was their child and the love affair's daughter getting married, that I'm like, time is really pushed forward.
It ends very abruptly.
It's suddenly the 30s now. This had to have been fast forwarding over something.
Yeah, and there's certain. I mean, if it has a weakness, it is in probably the editing, I would say.
Possibly.
Just the way the story editing goes.
Mm-hmm.
And the again. Oh, I kind of forgot to mention the last one. From my point of view, is food. It does not really show you how the food is made. The cooking thief is regular.
No.
This one takes time to show you how the food is made.
Mm-hmm.
In a sort of instructive way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way that the descendant is looking at it. She's looking through the recipes that her aunt wrote, and then a lot of it is from the perspective of also nannies and maids being like family to children more in a way than their mother could ever
Right.
be, and having them follow you throughout their life out of sheer like loyalty. Like this maid or this cook is meant to be with me and follow me through into this marriage from my childhood.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really been talking about the plot much more because that really is the plot. It's the youngest daughter is born into this family. She's not allowed to marry. She loves a boy. The boy is married off to her older sister, and the older sister dies because she sort of curses the food she's given her,
and it curses her bowels.
Yeah. And then she ends up sent away and sort of is going to marry this other guy who's very sweet, but they don't really have a very sweet doctor that she's not really attracted to, but she's comfortable with. In Texas. He's up in Texas.
And what is it, before they leave or while they're in Texas? There's like Mexican like convicts or like these. Like,
it's bandits. It's occurring during the Mexican Revolution. It's like 1910, and I don't think the story is particularly pro-revolution. It's because there are like bandits running around that
Yes.
Kill her mother, basically.
That's true.
And so her mother's ghost then starts haunting her, saying, "You better not take away your sister's."
There is so much Mexican symbolism and superstition at play that I'm like, of course her mom's there.
Yeah.
And there are times where I'm like, don't you know about this? This always happens. And like, someone's dooming you from beyond the grave, and how symbolic that is. And then what I meant to bring up by bringing up the bandits is that her middle sister, the one slightly older than her, the redhead, is taken away by the bandits, and then the rest of the family, including her older sister, kind of writes her off like, oh, she's a whore, oh, she's a prostitute, she's in a bordello. But then she comes back and she's the queen of the cowboys.
Yeah.
I wrote down queen of the cowboys.
Yeah, she's in charge of their part. I guess it's not.
I love that part.
It's not anti-revolution now that I think about it. No, she's sort of queen of the revolutionaries.
Yes.
She's their leader at this point.
Yeah, and how easy her life is.
And she sort of represents what could have gone better, and that helps push her sister to, become her own person and stop dealing with the literal ghost of her mother.
Sure.
It's also sort of like Water for Chocolate another reason I can see why it was popular is it's a bit of a bodice ripper.
Yes.
And it's, culturally exotic, but not outrageously culturally exotic. It's like something that middle class moms can go see in 1992. And it's super sincere, but its sex is never really sleazy, and its sincerity is never silly. And that sort of fairy tale quality kind of lets it be a little bit more sincere than
it's very Mexican in that way.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of historical fiction from this era would not let itself be quite so whimsical.
No.
Or at least the era after.
Especially
maybe that was a
with
90s
like
thing.
The constraints of family and what you're meant to do.
Right.
And like the wrong side of living and the correct, proper Catholic side.
Right. And I grew up in southern Arizona, so I know pretty well about Mexican cuisine, but mole was a big thing in this, and I do not like mole.
That's right. She made a wedding cake. What else? She made like some sort of soup for the...
The soup did look pretty good. It probably had a lot of tripe in it, but it was still...
You always think Mexican food has tripe in it.
Well, soups do.
Well, and then you always like uphold taco places that have tripe on their menu. That's like, if they can do tripe.
If you go into a taco or burrito place and they have beef tongue and tripe on their menu, you don't have to eat it.
Just know that
I don't really like those things, but the fact that it's there means that their other stuff is going to be good.
Yeah, it's going to be really good.
Like, in most cases, I suppose if you're in an area that already has a million Mexican restaurants, you might not have a great one, but if you're out in the Midwest, that's a pretty good indication of a good taco place.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all I have on that movie. Did you have any else?
The ingredients, of course.
Okay, so that's what. Yeah. So, are you getting ingredients of mole?
Not quite.
That's just chocolate and
It's dark chocolate.
dark chocolate and salt.
It's a sauce. There's more to it.
It's sauce. Okay.
Dried and fresh peppers, tomatoes, younger cheeses, softer cheeses like, we always get cotija, cilantro, cumin, corn / masa / tequila, all corn-based things. Rice, beans, red and white meats, seafood, cacao / dark chocolate. That's the mole for you. Embracing the salty, sour, and smoky. Bolillo bread. They had bread a few times. And they usually had it for breakfast, and quick breads like tortillas.
Yeah, it's sort of like, it's a pretty direct, I mean, Mexico's a big country, so there are different cuisines throughout it.
Yes, for sure. Different focuses on seafood if you're by the coast.
Yeah, but and then it focuses, it's a desert, so chili peppers make sense because those can grow.
And you can age them and dry them to make them hotter.
Yeah, but the things you really think about as Mexican food, a lot of them are indigenous cultures food mixed with Spanish cultures food.
Yeah, and they had a molcajete for grinding things, and that I recognized right away. And that's something that happens in like Central America, quote unquote, where there's a lot of corn, a lot of grinding, and I think they had corn flour being made like on a wheel.
I don't remember that, but I'm sure it was there. I definitely remember the grinding. That's something we actually did in school once when I was a kid.
It's a lot
Summer
of
school.
work.
Yeah, it wasn't fun. I really thought it was going to be fun when we were given the corn. We were told to grind it. I can make my own tortillas. Why don't I even need to buy them anymore? And like 2 minutes into it, I'm like, nah.
There's a reason.
No thanks. Yeah. So then we're gonna just barely jump out of this 1 decade period for our last 2 movies. They both were released in '96, so we were very close.
That's fine.
To being an exact decade. It would have been crazy. But the one that I needed to cover the most, because it's one of my favorites, is Stephen Chow's The God of Cookery, which is, I believe he had one movie between this and Shaolin Soccer, but this one really feels like him getting ready for Shaolin Soccer.
Yes.
Dealing with more special effects, changing his pace, aiming. I mean, it's still a lot of wordplay, but his earlier movies that he made himself, he actually was in a lot of other people's movies.
Yes.
There's so much wordplay that they're actually difficult to...
It's like region specific.
Yeah,
like inside jokes.
Like, I obviously I don't speak Cantonese, so it's hard.
And I'm sure pissing fish balls is hilarious to them, but I'm just like, what? Why do you want to do that? And
so it's like, but this is, it's I think that I like Shaolin Soccer more, but this is a very quintessential Stephen Chow movie. You can see all of his sort of trademarks in this movie. It's about a guy who is this sort of celebrity battle cook. So that's taking off of Iron Chef.
But he has like endorsements,
right?
And he like leads specific conferences and helps open up stores and cuts the ribbon, and he has lots of flunkies and underlings who like bow to his every whim. And including one guy who wants to take over.
Right, and so that's the basis of the story. Is it's just as Shaolin Soccer is just really the Bad News Bears with a different thing put on it. I couldn't place exactly what this. I swear to God, there is a movie that has this plot, and I just couldn't place it. It's probably another sports movie.
It could be.
This sort of blowhard rises to the top and is blind to his weaknesses and is knocked down to the bottom and has to build his way back up. Streets. And has to build his way back up in a more honest way.
Yes.
I suppose that's a little bit Bad News Bears in itself, actually. Or
he doesn't quite make a team.
Right. He has to better himself. But so it has all those trademarks of his movies, which are he's spoofing something in pop culture. And I had to look into this, and apparently he is spoofing. There was a movie called The Chinese Feast by Tsui Hark that was super mega popular the year before, and that kind of came out of Ang Lee had made a couple of movies in Taiwan, The Wedding Banquet, and I think that Eat, Drink, Man, Woman is also a Taiwanese film. I cannot remember if that one was made in America, but these were very popular international, just like Water for Chocolate, movies that did well in America.
Yes.
They were sold well and they were released at a proper time.
When does Iron Chef come into play?
I think the way I could figure it out, Iron Chef had existed since the mid 80s, and this is 96.
Mm-hmm.
So Iron Chef was a thing, and celebrity chefs were a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of combined those two ideas and then wanted to make fun of these banquet movies that are like these big drama comedies. They're all about people gathering around a big meal.
Yes.
Like the movie Soul Food is a kind of idea like that. Only that's
and
a funeral. That's like the funeral banquet.
You're ultimately talking more about the weaknesses of the family during these dinners.
Yeah,
too.
and it's like a way of people breaking, especially the Ang Lee movies are a way of breaking down tradition versus newer ways of thinking.
Talking about things you withheld for so long and that you always want to say to your parents or grandparents.
But you couldn't because tradition just dictated you had to
but
just
now
listen
at
to
dinner.
Right, and so that I can see God of Cookery being about tradition. But it's almost the opposite, where tradition kind of fixes the problem because he learns humility through tradition.
Correct. And then like street food comes into play too, where he really kind of gets up and learns from other people too.
Right. And so, he's making fun of that, and then he has nods to John Woo movies in particular. There's a bunch of nods to visual nods to the A Better Tomorrow movies.
Okay.
The way he's lighting things, the way people are walking down hallways in slow motion, stuff like that.
Exactly.
And then he apparently there was a series I've never actually seen, the God of Gambler series, which he starred in, but didn't write. God of Cookery. It's about a guy who's a gambler. So I think that there was a bit of using the title. It doesn't have supernatural shit going on. He was not in a lot of kung fu type movies. There was a couple that he didn't direct that he was in. But this one has also Shaw Brothers thing. After he is knocked down, it's sort of his manager and this new upstart sort of knock him off the top.
Yes.
And he ends up in the street and learns from a sort of street vendor lady who is another character he would recycle a million times. It's the same thing that happens in Shaolin Soccer, an attractive street vendor who is actually very attractive and a very special person who he is ignoring. He always is casting himself as the one that... he casts himself as assholes, except for in Shaolin Soccer, he's not quite an asshole, but mostly as assholes who have to learn to be better people.
I think he's an asshole in both this and Shaolin Soccer, in the sense that he like slaps these women or like tells them off, and they still love him so much, and just really like take after him. And
so it's like halfway between taking the piss out of himself. Like, I don't know exactly how big of a star he would have been at this point. Maybe this would have been like a Brad Pitt making a movie about himself where everybody loves Brad Pitt, but then figuring out that he likes the wrong person.
Sure.
But yeah, so he and this woman, he collaborates with these two street vendor, sort of like there's gangs that involve. It's one of these universes that revolves around food. I
kind of got a Michael Jackson's Bad from like different street vendors like fighting each other with food or with food knowledge.
And so he learns from them, and then he's still being a prick, and he ends up. His enemies are trying to assassinate him, and he ends up at the Shaolin golden Shaolin place and insults the head monk, and so he's left there for 6 months.
Yes.
And there's this hilarious series of sequences where he keeps trying to escape the monastery, and they find him, they beat the shit out of him and drag him bloody back inside. It's the exact same shot every time. And all that stuff's making fun of Shaw Brothers movies, which would have been a couple decades old by then. So it's like god tier slapstick stuff. Like, it is ultimate, just the greatest slapstick that you put in movies. They're in these Chow Yun-Fat movies, and they're a little bit mean-spirited. Oh, shit. Different Chow. Stephen Chow.
Stephen Chow.
Not Yun-Fat. Stephen Chow. He also has this mean streak and this sort of he finds wretched people really funny. Just the more wretched, the better. And he finds just humiliating people really funny.
Yeah.
The good guys and the bad guys.
That's true.
And so he finds Zen basically at the monastery and comes back and does basically an Iron Chef battle that involves Buddhist palm techniques.
That's right. And this is against the new God of Cookery.
Right. And so, and the movie ends with literal God of Cookery as like this sort of angel character coming in and saying that that this contest has not been correctly judged and a Deus Ex Machina to the extreme. Anyway, this is a movie that's just, I wish we watched it on my crappy DVD. There's just no good versions of it.
They kind of put it down a little bit.
Yeah.
It brought down the quality and like the what I took from it is that it was so much like Food Wars.
Yeah.
The God of Cookery is basically the God tongue, or
Food Wars being this Japanese cartoon.
Yes.
Is available on Netflix?
Or
Hulu?
Netflix, a couple seasons. Hulu, a few more seasons. There's some different
Crunchyroll.
Crunchyroll has uncaptioned, undubbed options, but you have to deal with commercials if you don't have a subscription. Anyway, with the judgment and people eating and appreciating this food, sometimes they like go into themselves like, this reminds me of my childhood, and having specific visions involving food, that comes up a lot in
well, and people have like literal orgasms in their clothes.
Yes,
their clothes
tear off.
There's like they're not something that's their clothes don't literally tear off their bodies. It's an image.
Yes,
like you cut back to them and they're clothed
and
again.
They're like chewing on the food with their eyes closed, just thinking about something.
But that's something that when the judge tastes his food and God of Cookery, she just goes through this whole dance and thing, and she's literally rolling on she's like a tiny person rolling on short ribs.
That's right.
I still remember the first time I saw it with my roommate at the time, and like basically the last 20 minutes of the movie or 15 minutes of the movie, he couldn't stop laughing. He was just he was out of breath, crying.
It's pretty zany.
But yeah, the fact that it doesn't have a good home video release means that the food doesn't look as mouth-watering as as you would hope it would.
That's a bummer.
And it doesn't really teach you to make things.
No, it pulls from Hong Kong food, Chinese food, a little bit of French food.
It does. It's sort of, it's a cartoon version of how to make this food.
And I kept on noticing that they use just a little bit of ingredients to make like a whole dish. Like I used a little bit of this and added it to flavor even the slightest like garnish of this bigger dish. There's a lot of excess like that.
It is kind of like watching an episode of Iron Chef where you're just, okay, I guess they just are doing things so fast and the camera's whipping around and they're trying to, the hosts are trying to explain, or the commentators are trying to explain, but it's not very, if you don't know about cooking, you can't really follow it.
The sources of all their food that they use and the secret ingredient, how important or how rare it is, and it's different when you're in the know, quote unquote. Yeah.
So, I don't know if it makes me as hungry as some of these other movies do, but it made me hungry enough. Nice noodle bowl stuff. I always like a good noodle bowl.
Yeah, we got noodles yesterday, and
it was awful.
That didn't work out so good.
Yeah, apparently
Chinese buffets are not ready for us.
No, we got our shots, so we thought we were ready for a Chinese buffet, and the Chinese buffets are not ready for us.
It's a letdown.
A lot of the good stuff.
But we got fortune cookies.
Yeah, so God of Cookery is specifically Hong Kong food.
Of sorts.
And because it's a Hong Kong movie, and it was made the year before Hong Kong was reabsorbed by China. So it really, and it still has its own culture. It's not the same as Chinese food.
No.
Then again, Chinese food, what we think of as Chinese food in America, is really American Chinese food.
Americanized, yes.
Yeah. There's, speaking of the documentaries that we're not covering, there's Finding General Tso, is that what it was called?
Oh, something like that. That was fantastic, though.
Which is really about how American Chinese cuisine is its own thing.
Correct.
it is an authentic type of food, but it's stuff that was made up.
Yes, it was a Chinese chef that came to the United States and fed some people in a hotel, and he made up this dish invoking someone named General So, and it's really, up for debate who that person really is. And it's kind of tempered to be not so hot for American tongues and just sweet enough to, and having MSG to have people coming back and getting more of it.
Yeah. It's called The Search for General Tso.
Ah, I see.
So that's one I would definitely recommend if we're talking about documentaries, which we're not.
Mhm.
We're not talking about documentaries.
Nope.
But anyway, so yeah, I don't know exactly what makes Hong Kong food Hong Kong food.
I
But
can
you
help.
do,
Yes. It's wok frying. They did a lot of wok frying
Yes,
there.
there's a lot of wok frying.
Hot peppers, ginger, garlic, rice or noodles with meat, seafood and rice. They did a lot of rice bowls there, along with the pissing fish balls. There was a lot of rice being made.
Mm-hmm.
Soy sauce, steaming, use of vegetables, water chestnuts, mushrooms, and bamboo shoots.
So not entirely different from what we think of as Chinese food either.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, Szechuan is an area of China that's mostly known for their spicy food. Hong Kong has their own levels of spice that they work with. And there's obviously street food being made.
Yeah, which is like Japan. The street food is a sort of culture that we don't have so much here. We had it's like there's street food now, like
We
food
have
trucks.
like hot dog stands and carts and stuff.
Yeah, but hot dogs really is what it was, and that's not
Which
even.
is German.
Yeah, which is German anyway. It probably came out of German immigrants, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, okay.
Oh, your grandpa comes out of New York cooking or baking.
Well, sort of, yeah. My grandfather, my mom's father, his family were
the
immigrants.
one who saw
Oh, the one who saw and loved Cook the Thief, his wife. No.
Lover.
His family was immigrants from Russia, and they opened a delicatessen. It was mostly a bakery, though.
Mm-hmm.
And
the
so,
ideal.
yeah, and so he learned the modern bakery, modern delicatessen.
Mm-hmm.
He learned baking tricks from his dad, but he was interested in. He was an English professor, so he was interested in.
And you said that he liked the book, or it was like about literature.
Yeah.
You
He would
said
like a
that-
movie if it was like technically, Cook the Thief, his wife and his lover, and her lover is not based on a book,
Mhm.
but it is of literature. So yeah, anything he
Correct.
would like would be of literature.
Mhm.
But that's actually a good segue because the last movie is the only American movie we're covering is 1996's The Big Night.
Just
It's
Big Night.
Just Big Night.
Yep.
It's directed by Campbell, Scott, and
Maybe the sequel will be called The Big Night.
The
like
Big
The
Night.
Batman.
The Bigger Night. It's directed by Campbell, Scott, and Stanley Tucci, who are artists. They're artistes.
Artistes.
They're
Let me tell you about my
actors.
craft.
This is like halfway between those Chinese big feast movies
Yes.
and modern food documentaries about restaurant culture.
Hmm. And with a big feast movies, similar truths come out in this movie too.
Yeah, and so this is a very like almost made in a lab.
Allegory.
No, I'm
No?
going somewhere else. I'm going somewhere less positive at the beginning here. This to me is like if you want to talk about mid '90s indie cinema,
Oh,
quote
right,
unquote indie
yes.
cinema.
You even got Minnie Driver in it.
Yeah, it's directed by actors.
Mhm.
It was not produced by the Weinsteins,
Mhm.
but it feels like it was.
I remember the very first scene where they say that what the production company is. I was like, "This is This is not Miramax."
Yeah, it wasn't Miramax.
I was so surprised.
Directed by it has a sort of nostalgic look at the immigrant experience specifically, which is something that a lot of those movies like.
It seemed on the outset relatively timeless, but it is the 50s.
Yeah, it specifically takes place in the 50s. And it's very loose formally. It's not a strictly. It sort of is a movie that's just the story happens as it happens from scene to scene.
Correct.
It's definitely a movie made by actors.
Mhm.
It not to say that it's visually unappealing. It's actually pretty well done visually.
Yes.
It's just that it is designed around scenes
Mhm.
rather than set pieces.
Mhm.
It could have been a stage play, pretty easily.
Very easily.
There's basically would be 4 sets.
There was a point where they went to the seashore for some sort of ingredient. That's the only in like a car. That's the only time where they were off like this, like one block.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like a very specific 90s thing. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No.
I think that cliches aren't inherently bad, and that the good movies of their eras and types rise to the top, and we ignore all the other ones. And this is one of those movies that people still remember and enjoy and like.
Yes.
And so it might be like a lot of other movies, but it did it better. And it was, yeah, so it's a very mid 90s flavor. There are just certain things about it that bother me as someone who doesn't like that era of movies very much.
Right.
But they're almost all vibe, which is not a really fair way to judge
I
anything.
think a lot of that was at play too between the two brothers and what they represent, because Primo, the oldest, was all about classic Italian food, keeping up appearances within your restaurant, sticking with it even though you're not doing so well. But Secondo, the younger brother, he like wanted to get bigger and be like the restaurant across the street and really embrace like American values and succeed.
Right,
And
and
have
so
enough money to show for it.
And so, yeah, that's basically the plot, is that there's this failing restaurant from these two brothers who we don't know exactly how long they've been living in America. I don't think they ever specify.
They do on the beach. I think they're like 15.
Yeah, it's
15
been
years?
a while, and they've been trying to get this restaurant started.
Yes.
And they know that they have special food, especially Segundo's food, and Segundo is played by Tony Shalhoub.
No, Primo is Tony Shalhoub.
Primo is Tony Shalhoub. Sorry, Primo's food is especially good.
Yes.
And Tucci plays Segundo. And they basically are going to be. They're not going to be able to keep. They're having bank problems.
They're selling their food for credit in the form of paintings.
Right, because Primo views this whole experience as an art, and he's refusing to let. Like, their first scene in the movie is sort of idiot American.
She wanted pasta on the side of her.
Right, and well, so the basic idea, yeah, it's that they don't.
He's not willing.
He doesn't
to,
think
like,
that there should be compromise.
Oh no.
For the sake of popularity. Meanwhile, they have a friend, a frenemy, who is played by
Ian
Holm, who apparently worked with Tucci on multiple movies that Tucci directed. I didn't realize that they were that close. And he has a much more successful restaurant, but it's super garish.
It's hell.
Yeah, it's literally called, the restaurants are literally called Heaven and Hell.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Clouds? I can't remember what the name of it.
The
Paradise.
Yes.
Paradise and Inferno.
You sure?
I
think it's something like after somebody's name.
Okay. Anyway, there's this pretty clear religious metaphor.
Absolutely.
And Ian Holm's character wants their place to close because he wants to poach them as chefs.
Yes.
But and this is like, one of the things that bothered me about the movie is that there's no surprises in it, really. I wasn't.
Swords.
But he implies that he is friends with Tito Puente. No? Louis Prima.
What is wrong with you?
Sorry. Louis Prima. Tito Puente. That would have been later.
Yes.
Louis Prima, and that he can get Prima to come to the restaurant.
Yes.
And so a bunch of people come to the restaurant.
On the premise of
meeting Louis Prima.
And
that's the quote, big night.
Yes.
So majority of the movie takes place over a single night.
Yes.
There's a little bit of stuff the day before. And, of course, Louis Prima's not going to come. And the movie ends on an ambiguous note. I think it's implied that they had a critic there,
right,
who I think is going to go tell his paper how.
You're like, that's how it's going to end.
I knew it, but it kind of cuts away at the end of as morning comes around.
Yeah.
But I think that's where I assume it's going to go. That's the plot. And then meanwhile, Stanley Tucci has a girlfriend in Minnie Driver, who's a young kind of idealistic American girl.
Yes.
And he's having an affair with Isabella Rossellini, who is Ian Holm's wife.
Correct.
Who's more like the old country femme fatale type.
Yes. Very Sophia Loren.
Yeah, very Sophia Loren. only actual Italian in the whole movie.
Well, maybe the barber next door.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
And I am sure Tucci is. I mean, Tucci sounds Italian to me. I don't know.
What's in a name?
Yeah. So, but a lot of the movie does like break down into the commerce versus art,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think so the metaphor, we're clear on the religious metaphor.
You say metaphor, but yes.
Well, it can't be literal because they're not literal. It's never made literal.
Okay. Fair.
The religious metaphor is the first layer metaphor. I think, from the way I read it, is that it is a movie about filmmaking, and filmmaking from the perspective of actors who want to be artistes, and having to balance commerce and art, and having this sort of
big
studio entity sabotaging what you're doing,
promising something,
and then saying, oh, too bad, but you can do this thing for me instead. Really seems like something a studio would do, is promise an actor they could do their dream project.
Prestige,
and then we just didn't have the money for it anyway, come to do our big studio movie anyway. And the way that the brothers seem to represent literally like just one person. And it's just one person's argument with himself. They're brothers too. There's a Cain and Abel thing going on, but I think that in a lot of ways they're supposed to be the same person dealing with how do I get through this.
Correct, and it could be too like maybe a script writer and
yeah, you could apply it to almost any job in the film industry.
Right.
And then the idea that. The immigrant idea is something that sort of is the literal theme of the movie, is that the idea of immigrants being what's the word?
Making it?
No.
Assimilated?
Assimilated, thank you.
Okay, sure.
And I think it has the fact that it ends on an ambiguous note makes me a little happy, because it feels up until that point that it's going to end up being one of those it's hard to be an immigrant, but if you just pull yourself up and try hard enough, you'll get through it. So the fact that we don't know if they actually got through it made me a little happy that they weren't being
it was nice
so
that
black
they
and
ended
white
on breakfast. I was like amazed that he was able to flip those eggs in one try.
That's true. They end on breakfast. Their one waiter is
Mark Anthony.
Mark Anthony, who hadn't done a lot of acting. He was still mostly a singer then. He's acted more since then. That the food prep is all fucking awesome.
Yes, I love.
And I mean, I just like Italian. I think most of us like Italian food.
Correct.
And it's sort of a mix of really proper Italian food, and then what, again, like the Chinese food has Americanized Chinese food. This is kind of an Americanized version
and they make that huge pasta pie.
Yeah.
Epic.
Which, that's like something you would see on your Food Wars show, where there'll be some sort of really specifically themed thing that no one's ever thought to make before. This feels like it's on the verge of that. Like it's his special,
it's
like
so classic.
Nobody's ever made this specific
right.
thing. This is his recipe.
Who would think to make that? Right.
But so this is the case where we're arguing differently, that I don't think there's a lot of magical realism in this one. I think that the supernatural implications are their subtext. But you think that we should be reading it more literally.
As being religious, yes. They're
a parable.
Sort of. It's definitely biblical that they need to. They're being tempted by the devil in hell. It's all red. He has certain influences, a whole lot of friends that have probably also bowed to his temptations. And then I have a specific note about how when Isabella Rossellini says, he didn't tell you. It's a shame that he didn't tell you, and maybe you guys will get through this. I know you will. I put the specific note. Maybe the devil is a woman. Maybe she was the devil all along. That she was like wanting them through temptation, making it seem like it was so easy. But then these two men, they like bare their souls on this beach, saying, why do we have to stay here? Why is it so hard? And that just really spoke to me about their angels on earth, and like, why is living and being mortal so hard? We were not promised this. When we were in Italy, we were told that this is where we would make our money and we would find fame and fortune, but now we just have to go back on this premise that our uncle will take us back and be chef at his restaurant. So that's ultimately where it could lead next. Like they could find fame from this critic talking about their restaurant, or after this breakfast is done, they're going to pack up and go back to Italy to their uncle.
Right. And yeah, so for me, that is just a distillation of the sort of myth of the American immigrant experience. And 50s is a good time for it. That was a time it was a little better to be an immigrant, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Post-war.
And definitely have a business.
And have a business and be welcome, and people are a little more interested in your food now.
There's like actual nightlife now.
Yeah. I didn't see it as quite so. I think that they were using the biblical stuff as for flavor to heighten all.
You had read something about how their set decoration was like meant to be symbolic and biblical.
Yeah, that was like one of the only. I looked into finding free like online essays about any of this stuff, and like one of the only essays I could find was an old review that was only focused on the set designs and names of the two restaurants as being Heaven and Hell.
Yes.
That was it. That was all I could. I was like, oh shit. I was hoping to find something a little more. But well, and the thing that might mean I'm wrong about the filmmaking metaphor is that is literally I keep saying literally. That's not what I mean. That is the metaphor for the movie Chef.
Yes.
And we had actually just watched something about that.
Yeah, like a YouTube clip.
And so that might have just been in my brain, but I still really think I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be about filmmaking. It's sort of be about any kind of art where you're not satisfied with
making somebody else's art.
Yeah, so like you either want to be rich or famous or do the right thing, and you think
be
you
yourself
can, and you think the two can meet, but they really can't. There has to be a compromise one way or the other. So what's Italian food? What do you want?
Italian food has ingredients like garlic, oregano, basil. You had a recent pulling of your heart between different pizzas. You're like, which one was the one I liked?
Basil or oregano? I can't remember.
Oh, at Punch Pizza, you're like the basis of it. I'm pretty sure you're an oregano guy. Anyway, there's also fennel, red and white meats, egg noodles, semolina flour, tomatoes, spinach, lemon is particularly northern Italy, red wine, olives, softer cheeses, and soft breads, and dried preserved sausages, and of course pizza.
Pizza and spaghetti.
Pizza.
Is
that all we got?
Yeah, I mean that was it. That's what we watched. I know again. Keep going back to Ratatouille. Probably the movie that made me the hungriest in my lifetime was watching Ratatouille.
I always like Joe Dreams of Sushi. That's like my happy place movie.
But yeah, I mean, so that's the idea of food themed movies that aren't documentaries, that have either a vague or not so vague mystic realism vibe. But yeah, we do have our fortune cookies from the restaurant. So
from our shitty Chinese buffet. This is supposed to be how our entire podcast was supposed to go.
Yeah.
This is kind of like our Karnak note instead of an envelope that we were supposed to relate to it. What's your Chinese
my
word?
lucky numbers are 17, 19, 4, 1, 47, and 46.
I also have 17 as my lucky number.
Oh, there you go. So my fortune is you will reach the highest possible point in your business or profession. Shit, this is going viral.
You know what else?
What?
Mine is, a man cannot be comfortable without his own approval. Did you enjoy this podcast?
Yeah. No. So,
Do you have anything you need to promote?
well, you can reach me as usual on the Genre Grandeur website, where I should have some more reviews coming up soon. On the Genre Grandeur Twitter, on my personal Twitter, which is Gabe M as in Matthew Powers, Genre Grinder Facebook. That's about it. I don't know exactly what the next episode is going to be, so I'm not going to advertise it yet.
You'll probably see me indirectly through Gabe's reviews, being as I do the editing for them. I make sure they spells and hyphenates correctly.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Until next time.
Tip your waiters.
Tip your waiters, at least 20%.
Don't keep your leftovers longer than a day.
Yeah. Our cat just jumped up here.
Bye.
Speaking of feeding, someone needs to be fed. All right, I'll let you guys go. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself. And Black Lives Matter. Bye-bye.